The stars shimmered like dust on glass beyond the observation window of the Concorde. A diplomatic flagship 3 kilometers long and shaped like a coiled helix in orbit above the neutral world of Ceros 3, within its silver-hulled chambers. From the noise of engines or the pulse of thrusters, a different kind of tension pulsed in the air, one made not from war or politics but from curiosity. Scientific, cultural, and biological representatives from over a dozen spacefaring species had gathered to classify the ecological structures of Earth, humanity's homeworld. The galactic community had long accepted Earth into its folds, but only recently had humanity begun sending its own representatives to these events. Previous reports had outlined their advances in propulsion, medicine, and digital networks. Culturally rich, adaptable, emotionally complex, but biologically, their profile remained confusing. And so, with fanfare and formalities, humanity had been invited to attend the Intergalactic Apex Survey Council, hosted by the Concorde's Biological Commission. Each species had already submitted reports, detailing their planet's apex organisms, creatures of fang, claw, venom, brute strength, or stealth, like giant leviathans that patrolled oceans, acid-spitting tunnel beasts that hunted in packs, predators evolved through violence and honed by selective extinction. The human who had arrived as Earth's official biological delegate didn't resemble anything the other species expected. She was slight in stature, compact in frame, clothed in a non-armored exoform suit. Her name was Lay no titles, no crest, no ceremonial markings, just a calm gaze and a slight knowing smirk that she never seemed to drop. She hadn't spoken much in the preliminary sessions. She listened while others detailed their native creatures with pride, scale, and sinew. Venom sacs, symbiotic armor, multi-layered bone density, hive combat instincts. When it came time for Earth's classification, she simply nodded and said, "I'll answer that when the time comes." It was that moment that planted the seed. What were humans hiding? The chamber hosting the session was circular and elegant, a layered amphitheater beneath a massive domed view of space. Each delegation hovered at a different level, suspended on kinetic lifts, encased in transparent platforms. The Council of Carnal Classifications, as it was formally known, had never had a session quite like this. The questioning began as it always did, with polite requests and taxonomic terminology. A crystalline entity from the Ventari cluster flickered with luminescent pulses as it asked, "Does Earth's dominant life form possess natural weapons?" Lane tilted her head. No claws, no fangs, no exoskeleton, no venom. A chorus of confused, chittering, rumbling, and trilling spread among the attendees. A Sorok war biologist, whose own species descended from apex ambush predators, asked with amusement, "Then surely your species' apex predator is a separate animal. It's a large terrestrial carnivore? One of your engineered beasts, perhaps?" Lane stood, slow and quiet, and turned toward the center of the room. The lift platform beneath her rotated to face all delegates equally. Her smirk sharpened into a smile, calm, not mocking. And then she raised her hand, palm open, fingers steady, not pointing at a display or specimen, pointing at herself. At first, the chamber hesitated. Confusion rippled outward. Laughter followed, soft at first, then louder. Not cruel, just incredulous. A gas-form entity blinked a holographic eye and buzzed. "You are saying humans are the apex predator of Earth?" Lane didn't lower her hand. "No, I'm saying I am." The laughter faltered. Not because of the words, because of the way she said them. She didn't boast. She didn't even raise her voice. There was no challenge, no explanation, no demand for respect. Just a statement, a truth. One that slowly began to settle. Like a storm cloud over the delegates' amusement, a silence followed, different than before, like the kind of silence that trails behind confidence and arrogance. The Iraqi commander at the top tier of the amphitheater leaned toward a subordinate and whispered, "She believes it." The subordinate shivered, metallic frills twitching. "Should we ask for evidence?" "She's human," the commander replied. "She'll offer it soon enough." And with that, the session was no longer academic. It had become a test. Quiet question now hung in the room. It's unspoken yet heavy. What happens when the galaxy's most underestimated species decides to prove itself? Daw! The laughter had faded, but its ghost still lingered in the room. Not because the delegates still found Lane's claim amusing, they didn't. It was the kind of silence that lingered when people realized they may have misjudged the punchline of a joke. And now they were unsure whether they had been laughing with her, or at their own ignorance. Lane sat back down on her lift platform, crossing one leg over the other with quiet ease. She didn't look smug, didn't gloat. Simply waited, watching as I assume with pupils, some with multifaceted glow, some with scanning reticles turned toward her with a new kind of interest. The Apex Council was not a military tribunal. It wasn't designed for threat assessments. It was a consortium of scientific observers and cultural liaisons. It's meant to examine how different species evolved in their native ecosystems and how their biological traits influenced galactic cooperation. And yet, in that moment, Lane had disrupted that system with a gesture as simple as raising her hand. There had been no display, no visual aids, no data packets. Just one human in a room full of apexes, claiming she outranked them all. The delegates didn't know what to do with that. The first to recover was a Lixorian xenobiologist, massive, Kimbian-skinned, with iridescent folds that rippled when it spoke.
Act.
Translator orb, which pulsed in midair as it said, "If this is your apex predator, then by what metric does your species define apex? We define it as the entity with no natural predators and the capacity to dominate its biosphere without technological crutches." Lane tilted her head. That's a good definition. Ours includes something else. And what's that? Lixorian asked, with mild condescension. Lane didn't blink. The ability to choose violence or restraint, and be lethal either way. That answer silenced the Lixorian. Across the chamber, another delegate activated their signal. A sleek, bone-plated Oraxi, warrior clearly military, Cass leaned forward. Are you implying that humans are dangerous without weapons? Lane's smile returned, slightly sharper this time. I'm not implying it, I'm saying it. Room stirred again, but this time not with laughter. There was a tone shift, faint but definite. Another voice cut in. This one belonged to a being suspended in a nutrient vat, its form little more than tendrils and a neural core. We have studied your physiology. Bone strength is moderate, skin is vulnerable, vision limited to one narrow light band. That's no claws. No regenerative systems. You lack natural armor, flight, venom, camouflage, heat adaptation. Lane raised a finger, stopping the litany midstream. All true. And yet we're here, in space, sitting at your table. Funny, isn't it? The vat being paused, Lane leaned forward slightly, voice quiet but firm. Our planet has creatures with claws, with venom, speed. You've seen them in our biosphere reports. They're not on this council. We are. At that, the Araxi stood. Then prove it. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Lane didn't look surprised. She actually seemed pleased. Prove what? That you are Earth's apex, the warrior hissed. Face something worthy, without weapons, without assistance. Alone. You proposing a combat trial? Asked the council moderator, raising a cluster of glimmering eyes. This is not a battlefield. I'm proposing a demonstration, the Oraxi replied. A neutral zone simulation. One of our combat species versus one human. In a closed environment, monitored, controlled, Lane's eyes didn't flicker. No death, just demonstration. The Araxi nodded. Non-lethal, decisive. Lane turned to the council. Then I accept. The chamber was silent again, but not out of confusion this time. Out of awe. The human hadn't hesitated. Not even for a moment. The moderator clicked its mandibles, then tapped a crystalline control node at the center of the room. A dozen glyphs lit up around the chamber. Council will reconvene at Observation Dome 7. Species selection will be randomized from Tier 3 threat classifications. Terms agreed. Subject has volunteered. Lane stood and brushed imaginary dust off her knee. Let me know when you're ready." She turned and walked calmly from the room. As she exited, the delegates murmured to one another, not in amusement now, but in calculation. Some debated what creature she might face. Others doubted she would last more than minutes. But a few, especially the older and war-scarred ones, said nothing at all. They had seen this before, not on Earth, but in humans. That calm before action, that refusal to bluster or brag, that chill clarity in the moment before chaos. Many species raged. Before a fight, some chanted, some entered ritual trances, but humans, they just decided, and then they acted. Back in the chamber, the Araxi leaned over to one of its aides and whispered, "She doesn't understand what we're throwing her into." The aide hesitated. Or maybe she does. The doors sealed, the countdown began. Observation Dome 7 was unlike the Grand Council chambers or diplomatic halls aboard the Concorde. It wasn't meant to impress guests or host ceremonies. It was built for truth. Cold, clinical, unforgiving truth. A vast, reinforced chamber, lined with holoprojectors, climate modulators, and terrain simulators, capable of generating fully immersive ecosystems drawn from thousands of worlds. Every root, every gust of wind, every drop of moisture was controlled, recorded, and studied. Now it had been prepared for a singular purpose, to test a human. The council had chosen the simulation parameters carefully. They debated for over an hour about the creature to release into the dome. Some advocated for Earth-based threats, perhaps a large feline or apex pack hunter for fairness. But others, led by the Araxi warrior who had issued the challenge, pushed for something more telling. Eventually, consensus was reached. The creature chosen was the Threxula predator native to a death world near the Orion perimeter. It resembled a hybrid of insect and reptile, six-legged, with retractable talons, a sensory frill that detected movement through vibration, and a neural pain threshold so low it would keep fighting long after injury. Intelligent enough to hunt strategically, it's tough enough to shrug off most tranquilizers. It had once been used for shock trooper selection in the Gorthon military. Less than 40% survived encounters with it with armor. Lane would face it without so much as a stun baton. As she stepped onto the prep platform, she was offered light protective clothing, pulse-tracking wristband, and a communications implant for emergency extraction. She declined the implant. "I don't plan to scream for help," she said quietly. The Araxi watched from the upper glass partition. "She's walking in like it's a stroll through a park," it muttered. Lane entered the dome. Within seconds, the chamber morphed. Jungle terrain formed around her, humid, dense, slick with bioluminescent moss and hanging vines. Trees twisted upward like frozen serpents. The scent of rot and fungal decay filled the air. Cameras locked onto her from every angle. From the upper galleries, the delegates took their places. Screens displayed her vitals, heart rate steady, respiration normal, no fear. The Threxel entered from the far side, unannounced. It skittered forward, silent but fast, ducking behind rock outcroppings, weaving through undergrowth. It was larger than Lane, maybe 7 feet long, low to the ground, with rear legs designed for pouncing. Its eyes were narrow, set wide apart, and it flexed its claws with impatient rhythm. Lane heard it long before she saw it. She didn't run. Instead, she lowered herself slowly, brushing her fingers against the dirt. Picked up a broken stick, not long enough for a weapon, but solid. She tapped it against a tree trunk once, then twice. The Threxel's head turned. The trap had begun. She moved deliberately, using terrain to her advantaged height, passages where the larger predator would struggle, vines that could be twisted into snares, mud patches that disrupted movement. She didn't try to outmuscle it. She outhawed it. She let it believe it had the advantage, luring it deeper into a narrow gully choked with roots and loose stone. Then came the charge. As the Threxel lunged, shrieking a high-pitched, insectal screech meant to disorient prey. Its legs lashed. Forward, Lane rolled to the side, snatched a jagged stone mid-motion, and jammed it upward as the beast passed. The tip caught just beneath its frill. It screeched louder, stumbled, but didn't stop. Turned again, faster now, enraged. It lunged once more, slashing its forelimb. This time Lane ducked under, let it pass, then grabbed the limb mid-strike. Her whole body twisted, bone cracked. She didn't let go. In the observation deck, several delegates stood unconsciously. The human had caught the Threxel's attack, not dodged, not blocked. Caught. Lane hauled herself up the beast's side, wrapping her arm around the sensory frill. It thrashed violently, trying to throw her off, but she tightened her grip and drove her heel into its spine with calculated force. Again and again. The Threxel collapsed after 40 seconds of violent struggle. It wasn't dead, but it wasn't getting up. Its legs twitched involuntarily, muscles spasming, frill half-torn and trailing blood. Lane stood slowly, breathing hard. She was bleeding from her shoulder, where a claw had grazed her. Dirt covered her face, and a bruise was forming near her ribs. But she was standing. Cameras zoomed in on her face. She didn't speak. She didn't raise her arms in victory. She simply pointed to herself once more, and then walked out of the simulation zone without a word. The delegates stared in stunned silence. The Oraxi sat down slowly, unsure whether it felt fear or respect, because the Threxel had been chosen to prove a point that humans didn't belong at the top of the chain. But all it had proven was that humans didn't need to belong there. They put themselves there. The walk from the simulation chamber to the medical wing was uneventful, but not because there was nothing to stir there. Because everyone made space. Lane's steps were deliberate, controlled. Her shoulder was bloodied, the torn edge of her tunic soaked from where the Threxel's talon had sliced into muscle. Bruises bloomed purple along her ribs. Dirt caked her palms and face, and a streak of greenish ichor from the Threxel clung to her boots like a trophy. And yet she moved with the calm certainty of someone returning from a chore, not from battle. The corridors of the Concorde were suddenly quieter. Crew members in attendance, those who hadn't witnessed the trial firsthand, still stepped aside instinctively, responding to whispers already making the rounds, whispers of a human who fought one of the galaxy's most dangerous apex predators, with nothing but dirt, instinct, and sheer refusal to quit. In Observation Dome 7. The silence persisted long after Lane had exited. No one spoke. The simulation had ended minutes ago, yet the delegates remained, rooted in place, watching the replay loops already broadcasting to their private channels. From dozens of angles, the footage repeated. Lane's dodge, her counter. The way she pulled the Threxel off balance and used its own momentum to bring it down. The stone strike under the frill. The way she didn't stop. Eventually, the silence was broken by the Ventari delegate, a crystalline being who had once scoffed at the idea of unarmored humans being of any martial significance. It didn't make sense, it said, voice faint and shimmering. That should not have been survivable. The Threxel was faster, heavier. It had reach advantage. The Araxi seated across from it didn't respond right away. The war-born species, known for its brutal training regimens and culture of calculated violence, had pushed for the trial to expose the human's limits. Instead, it had exposed something else entirely. She didn't win because she was stronger, the Oraxi finally said. She won because she wasn't afraid of losing. Another delegate, a being from the whisper-thin Avar, Cass leaned forward nervously. What kind of creature fights like that, without weapons, without backup? The question hung in the air, unanswered, in the upper tiers. The council's chairperson, Anne, ancient figure from the gaseous Delvin species, floated silently above the group. Deep in thought, at last it activated the central holograph, replaying. The moment that had shifted everything, not the strike, not the scream, not the submission of the predator, but that simple, silent gesture. Lane, pointing at herself. That was what shook them the most. Because it wasn't said with pride. It wasn't spoken as a threat. It was delivered as fact. No embellishment. No need to explain. I am Earth's apex predator, back in the medical wing. Lane sat on a diagnostic bed while a soft-voiced medic applied a regenerative salve to her shoulder. Her expression hadn't changed. Calm, focused, not angry, not smug. The medic, a four-eyed being with delicate movements, cleared its throat awkwardly. That was impressive. Lane tilted her head slightly. I didn't do it to impress anyone. Oh, the medic blinked. Then, Elaine took a moment before answering. She looked out the small viewport beside the bed, where stars drifted in eternal stillness. Because they needed to understand, she said. Apex doesn't mean claws or teeth. It means choice. We choose when to fight. And when we do, we don't stop. Elsewhere on the ship, council members began convening in private. A reclassification proposal had already been drafted. Earth's threat profile, once labeled culturally complex, biologically average, was now being reevaluated. Provisional status: Predator-class sentient, not because of their technology, not because of their numbers, but because of one. Truth, now backed by undeniable evidence. When humans fight, they do so knowing they might lose. And they fight anyway. The report summaries would circulate for weeks. Footage would be studied in military academies across the galaxy. The moment that would be remembered, the image that would haunt war rooms and inspire doctrine changes, was a dirt-covered human woman standing over a defeated monster, pointing silently to herself, not with ego, but with certainty. She knew what she was now. So did the galaxy. News moved fast aboard the Concorde, faster still across the relay networks of the Coalition's high-tier diplomatic fleets. By the time Lane had finished medical treatment, the footage from Observation Dome 7 had already spread to every military, scientific, and diplomatic enclave on board. Within hours, it would leap across communication relays into secured channels throughout the greater galactic assembly. But even before that, the consequences had begun to ripple in one of the ship's deeper strategy chambers, where sunlight never reached, and only senior intelligence liaisons were allowed entry. A dozen species representatives gathered in silence. The room was built like a cathedral, tiered, dimly lit, and lined with bioreactive screens currently looping the final 30 seconds of Lane's encounter with the Threxel. There she was, drenched in blood, standing as the beast twitched at her feet. No weapons, no armor, just raw endurance and brutality made deliberate. For most of the galaxy's species, survival was a trait of the lucky. Victory was a measure of preparation, superior evolution, or tactical superiority. But what they had witnessed was something else entirely. She should have died, whispered a Varnic military director, its voice like crushed leaves. The creature has ended entire hunter squads. She didn't fight like prey, said another, more slowly. She fought like she was used to pain. She didn't just survive it, said the Araxi commander. She controlled it. The word hung there like smoke. Controlled. Not escaped. Not avoided. Controlled. That was the part the galaxy's elite couldn't stop replaying in there. Mind's Lane had shown no panic. No moment of desperate, uncontrolled flailing. She had fought the Threxel, not like someone discovering violence, but like someone intimately familiar with it, someone who'd faced it before, and worse, come to terms with it. No war cry. No bravado. Just action. Just calculation, just the exact amount of force needed to win. The Ventari historian spoke softly, refracting a dozen color pulses across its crystalline body. We have always assumed that humans are intellectually dangerous, resilient. Yes, clever, but emotionally unstable. It appears we have misunderstood the kind of stability that matters. The Council's security auditor, who had remained silent until now, tapped one clawed digit on the table. She bled. She bruised. She broke a limb. And she never retreated. Do you know what species that reminds me of? Everyone turned. The auditor's eyes narrowed. None. No one answered in another part of the ship far. From the shadowed meeting rooms and hushed strategic whispers, Lane sat quietly in a commons lounge, sipping water from a ceramic flask and staring at the floor. She wasn't being watched officially, but she knew someone, somewhere, was observing. Her shoulder throbbed in a dull, rhythmic way. The medule had sealed the worst of the wound, but she hadn't asked for additional pain suppressants. She didn't need them. The pain grounded her. Nearby, 2 maintenance technicians. both from species with predator ancestors, sat whispering in a corner booth. One of them glanced in her direction, quickly looked away, then muttered, "She's smaller than I expected." Then, "You didn't watch what she did," the other replied, tone tense. "Size doesn't matter when you fight like that." Lane caught the whisper, didn't acknowledge it. She simply took another sip and closed her eyes. This wasn't the first time she'd been doubted. It wouldn't be the last. But this time the stakes were different. This time, she wasn't just fighting to survive, she was fighting to represent humanity. A species that the galaxy had placed in a neat, manageable box. The charming little mammals, fast learners, the tool makers. The box was gone now. And the galaxy was realizing it had no idea what humans actually were when unchained from comfort and pushed past the point of caution. Back in the strategy chamber, the Delvin representative finally spoke. Its body shifted in shimmering gas patterns, voice echoing through audio receptors. "We cannot afford to see humans as a mid-tier species any longer. They are not conquerors, but they are capable. Capable in ways we did not account for." The silence in response wasn't disagreement, was consent. Every delegate in the room was rethinking everything they had believed about humans. If one unarmed woman could reduce a biogenetic war beast to a broken heap in minutes, what could 1,000 of them do? What about 1,000,000? What would happen if humanity stopped holding back? A proposal was drafted that evening. It didn't say much on the surface, just a reclassification. A shift from adaptive emergent to apex compatible sentient. A polite way to say, approach with caution. Some voted reluctantly, others voted with trembling certainty, and a few the quietest. Ones wondered something else entirely. Had humanity shown them everything? Or was this just their first wave? One thing was certain now. In a galaxy filled with monsters engineered for war and creatures born to kill, the most dangerous predator might just be the one who chose when to fight and smiled while doing it. Asterisk by. The next solar cycle, the Concorde had become the quietest diplomatic vessel in its quadrant, not because of tension. Not due to conflict, but because every conversation, every hallway exchange, every council sidebar, every whispered translation between interpreters began with one subject encircled endlessly around it: the human. Lane's trial against the Threxel had eclipsed protocol. The video footage had become required viewing for security staff. Tactical analysts were breaking it down frame by frame, noting not just her movements, but her expressions, her posture, her restraint. It wasn't the violence that shook them, it was the precision, and most unsettling of all, the control in countless species. Aggression was linked to desperation or biological impulse. But Lane's performance had none of that. There was no panic, no berserker trance, no adrenaline-fueled thrashing. Instead, her attack had been timed, efficient, and disturbingly cold, as if she had already seen how it would end. It was simply waiting for the creature to catch up. Council leadership tried to steer attention back towards scheduled matters: Earth's ecological classification, genetic compatibility assessments, trade route negotiations. But every question, every statement led back to the same conversation: was humanity hiding something? In Observation Dome 2, a side session on cross-species conflict de-escalation was paused. Mid-discussion, after one delegate from the Zeltri Alliance asked bluntly, "Is it true the human did not scream when her arm was broken?" Another delegate replied she didn't even blink. She tightened her grip. No one spoke for a full minute after that. Meanwhile, aboard Deck 7C, Lane moved through the halls like a ghost present, calm, but eerily self-contained. Her presence disrupted rooms even without a word. Staff stood straighter. Conversations stopped and quietly resumed with altered tones. No one avoided her, but no one looked too long either. That's what happens when you walk with the gravity of a story behind you. Lane didn't revel in it. She didn't perform. She went about her routine with quiet discipline: wake early, stretch, review briefings, read. She'd requested access to the Concorde's database archives, and the Council had given it without hesitation. They weren't just granting a favor. They were watching, studying, hoping for insight. to the enigma that had landed on their ship, shattered their assumptions, and walked away without a scratch on her pride. In one quiet room near the ship's diplomatic core, a small gathering of senior delegates met to discuss next steps. The walls were sound-sealed, the lights dim, the atmosphere controlled to match the comfort thresholds of the 10 attending species. Their topic? Humanity's strategic status. She was meant to demonstrate biological strength, said a violet-bloomed analyst. Instead, she demonstrated psychological dominance. That is more dangerous. She fought a Tier 3 predator and won with primitive leverage and terrain exploitation, another delegate replied. We assumed humans required technological assistance. Now, we must factor in their individual lethality. The Oraxi military liaison, arms crossed, said nothing for a long time. Then finally, we used to test our young on Threxels. Didn't come back, we stopped. The human didn't hesitate to face one, said another, nodding slowly, voluntarily, alone. There was a beat of silence. Imagine what a trained human combat team is capable of, the Delvin whisperer murmured. The room tended, not because the idea was new, but because they had never needed to imagine it before. Humanity had played nice, curious, cooperative. They learned languages fast. They asked more questions than they answered. They respected protocol, but none of that mattered anymore, because now the galaxy had seen one of them without a translator, without armor, without fear, and the illusion of fragility that had cloaked their species had evaporated. Elsewhere, Lane stood before a viewing port in one of the outer decks, arms crossed, eyes unfocused, as stars drifted in endless silence outside. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't angry. She looked patient. Behind her, a low voice spoke up, an older observer from the Mirani Corps. You know what you've done, don't you? Lane didn't turn around. I did what they asked. The Mirani was silent for a moment. You answered a question, but the galaxy heard a challenge. Now Lane turned slowly, meeting the being's soft amber gaze. No, she said. I answered with a warning. The Mirani stiffened. A warning? Lane nodded once. We are not violent by default, but we know violence. We lived alongside it for thousands of years. We built cities with one hand while holding a weapon in the other. And we evolved not to dominate nature, but to survive it. She stepped forward. To survive anything. The Mirani stepped back unconsciously. Not in fear, but in understanding. This wasn't a predator bragging about its strength. It was a survivor reminding the room that survival always has a cost. As Lane walked past him and disappeared into the corridor, the Mirani realized what the others were only beginning to grasp. Humanity didn't demand a seat at the table. Didn't need to. Because once the galaxy knew what they truly were, no one would dare take that seat away from them again. The official reclassification arrived 3 days later. It was delivered without ceremony, as if softening the implications would dull the reality. The document was encoded in the Council's universal linguistic matrix and transmitted to every major diplomatic outpost, research institution, and species registry. One line bolded at the top in every translation: Homo sapiens, reassigned to Category S, apex sentient, predatory capable. That final word, capable, was the most carefully chosen in the Council's history. Not aggressive. Not hostile. Not dangerous. Because all of those terms suggested volatility, unpredictability, or madness. And none of them applied to the human who had fought the Threxel. What Lane had demonstrated was intent, measured, precise, controlled. That was what rattled the galaxy more than any display of raw strength ever could. On the Concorde, the shift. It wasn't immediate, but it was palpable. Protocols adapted. The diplomatic guard no longer casually left the Earth representative unattended in council chambers. Lane's meeting slot suddenly filled up with scientists, war strategists, psychologists. Her datapad chimed daily with requests, joint training invitations, research interviews, species exchange programs. She declined most of them. Lane wasn't interested in attention, she had already said. everything she needed to say with her silence. With her actions, the one raised hand, in the central promenade, usually a place for interspecies mingling, few trade and recreational chatter, the atmosphere had grown more restrained. Delegates still met. The usual easy laughter was tempered by a collective awareness that something fundamental had changed. One moment had shattered. Centuries of presumption, not because of what humans had done, but because of what they hadn't done yet. In the Oraxi War College, cadets were already reviewing combat theory through a new lens. Human tactics, improvised battlefield domination. Lane's trial footage became part of official training modules, not as a cautionary tale, but as a reference in the Delvin archives. A philosophical treatise began circulating, The Predator Who Chose Restraint. Scholars debated whether humanity's apex status had less to do with biology and more to do with psychology, the ability to choose not to kill, even when capable of it. And in the Ventari homeworld, crystalline intellects had once dismissed humanity as inefficient and noisy. A new field of study was quietly formed: anthropolethal potential theory. Across the galaxy, other species began re-evaluating their own assumptions. The slow ones, the arrogant ones, the ones who had never experienced conflict. They began to wonder what it would mean to face a species that could both love and destroy with equal intensity, and know exactly when to do each. Lane herself remained unchanged. She continued her routine on the Concorde, unflustered by the storm she had created. But it hadn't been a challenge. It had been an answer. Simple, honest, final. And when, eventually, she was invited back to Earth as part of the official diplomatic rotation, she departed the ship quietly, her duffel slung over one shoulder, boots thudding softly on the loading ramp. But as she passed through the hangar, she paused. Dozens of crew had assembled there not by order, but out of silent consensus. Engineers, technicians, translators, guards, council aides, different species, different worlds, different beliefs. All of them had come to see her off. Lane didn't speak. She just gave them a nod. It was small, subtle, but that single nod said more than any speech ever could. Respect, acknowledged. Fear earned. And as the shuttle doors sealed behind her, the Araxi commander who had once doubted her, challenged her, even pushed for her, Trial stood with arms folded and muttered to no one in particular. We asked what Earth's apex predator was, and we didn't get an answer. He glanced toward the shuttle disappearing into the docking tunnel. We got a reminder. The galaxy would remember. Not because a human fought a monster and lived, but because she did it calmly, because she made them watch, and because, when it was over, she didn't gloat. She just pointed to herself and left the rest to history.